Hey guys, my name is Dion Reed. This is my wife, Bridget Reed. We are Relationality Counseling. I'm super excited to invite you guys into our very first marriage maintenance workshop. We're really going to be going to a lot of things that are really going to be able to help your marriage and be able to help, honestly, a lot of younger couples and older couples as well too. We're going to be covering things as far as foundations of marriage, effective communication, keeping the spark alive, dealing with relationality, conflict, and as far as building through growing together over time. That's going to be a huge thing for us. So we really want you guys to sit back and look forward to it.
Yeah, make sure you take out a pen and paper because a lot of information will be given. Put away your devices because we don't want any distractions. Grab your spouse, you guys sit down and lean in together. This is a time where you can grow and invest in your relationship. And I would also want to mention that we have been doing this since 2015. We recently decided to get more into the counseling part of it. So we've done both coaching and counseling. So you're going to get a little bit of both. We're excited to share with you guys these 5 topics that we're going to be discussing. So let's get started. Okay, so the first section is understanding the foundations of marriage. We're going to be talking about in this particular section, trust and mutual respect. The foundations of marriage is very important. If you think about building a house, you cannot build the house without the foundation, but you also have to make sure the foundation is not faulty. So that's important when you are building the foundation of your relationship. Now, if you are newlywed, this is something you're still building. You might be in the very beginning stages of building the foundation to your relationship. That's okay. If you've been married for some time, you might have to go back and inspect to see, do we have any cracks in our foundation? Is there something that we need to really look at again and to make sure that we reinforce this foundation to build upon in the future? So one of them is trust. Like I said at the beginning, trust is built over time and it happens through consistent actions. Your trust can be broken, whether that is through how you speak to your spouse or maybe how they feel safe around you. It's really big when it comes to trust because if your spouse doesn't feel safe, then why would they share their most vulnerable thoughts and feelings with you? So it's important to ask yourself and ask your spouse, like, do you actually feel safe around me? Do you feel like you could be emotionally vulnerable? Have we lost that in the years of being together? This is the very beginning of building a strong foundation. Another thing to note about trust is that some people have gone through situations where infidelity was involved and that was broken. So we have a resource for you actually where Dr. John Gottman, he has a book called The Science of Trust. We highly suggest you get this book and then invest into counseling if you feel like you can't move forward.
Absolutely. And safety, I think, is huge because that's one of the main things that we talk a lot about as far as really facilitating vulnerability and being able to be honest with your spouse in that way. If we don't have a safe space to communicate, then that build of trust actually doesn't have any ground to stand on. So what we really want to do is try to establish that specifically for each spouse. And so us understanding that and working through that, I think is going to be imperative. So the next section that we're going to be touching on also as well is going to be maintaining that trust. And so the maintenance of that trust and being able to sustain it for the most part is going to show consistent behavior of openness and allowing that vulnerability to be safely facilitated so that we can make sure that when we are allowing ourselves to understand, hey, this person needs a space to where they can communicate. This person needs a space where they can be honest. Then that means that we actually can't punish the space of honesty. We have to make sure that that's a space to where we can be open and communicate about our mistakes, communicate about our flaws and things of that nature, and that trust can actually be sustained throughout a period of time.
Yeah, and this also is where sometimes your past and your family upbringing can play a part in how you give trust, how you receive trust. And if you've been triggered in the past about, different areas of trust in your relationships with other people close to you, that could also affect your relationship as well. So when you think about maintaining that trust or even rebuilding it, which we'll go into just a second here, you really want to think about how am I responding to my partner when they give me their most vulnerable state? Am I providing the safety net that they need in that moment so that that can continue to be provided and they feel comfortable sharing these things with me? Trust is not only what you give, it's how you receive it as well. And your partner will pick up on how you're receiving that trust.
Absolutely. And that next section of trust that we're going to be addressing is now going to be rebuilding that trust. Now, this comes from a space where we actually understand where there actually has been an infidelity, or there has been a mistake, there has been a break in that trust, and now we're trying to actually do some patchwork. We're trying to do that we're trying to do that repair work that needs to be done in the relationship and in the marriage, at whatever age and stage that actually is. The specific area that we really want to be able to address in this is understanding that when we're rebuilding, there has to first and foremost be a foundation of forgiveness. There cannot be a space where we're not allowing ourselves to forgive and allow that reset button to actually be hit. Because when we actually don't allow that space to hit, then that basically means that we're playing against the old scoreboard. Against the old scoreboard that's just being kept for the most part, and no one can ever live down what they've done in the past in that situation if we're not given that clean slate in that space to say, all right, I'm actually making a commitment now to doing a different behavior, to actually being specific around what change behavior that actually is going to be done.
And what my husband is saying is like about forgiveness. This is easier said than done, right? Forgiveness is a journey. It's going to take consistent effort. And you're going to have the person that is rebuilding that trust is going to have to do trustworthy things for a consistent period of time, and acknowledging that, like, okay, I made a mistake. You don't want to dismiss that. You don't want to dismiss that you made a mistake or try to push past it. You really want to acknowledge it first and then work towards your partner rebuilding that trust with your partner. That is integral, because without the acknowledgement, your partner might feel like you haven't even realized what it was that broke the trust, and then they're afraid that you're going to repeat that behavior in the future. So let's just make sure we're doing that. And again, we always advise, if you can't get beyond this for yourself, to seek out help. Don't try to do this by yourself. To seek out further help. Dr. John Gottman's book is a great place to start, but there's other books and resources as well.
Absolutely. And so the next section that we're going to be jumping into now is going to be mutual respect. And so this right here is a key area as well too, obviously within the foundations that we're establishing here, because mutual respect is somewhere where we actually realize that we have an equal playing field, where we actually have a mutual understanding between both our spouses, to where we're understanding that we actually honor and respect, and we actually show love in our communication, right? And that way we're actually getting reciprocation of what we're understanding from what the other person is saying. And if that isn't really, in place specifically for us, truth be told, it's really a non-starter at that point. We have to really allow ourselves to have that space and have the capacity to be able to hear the other person in that way. And so we have to allow, again, understanding that giving that room and giving that space and giving that respect from the other person to the other, that's really important for us to have established overall in our marriage.
Yeah, and just like to be real honest, like we had to learn this because, studies have shown that respect and honor is a man's greatest need and security is a woman's greatest need.
True.
And in the beginning, we didn't know that. When we first got married, we didn't know how to respect, how to honor, how to provide security. So we understand it. If you're having trouble or you feel like, what am I doing wrong? Really identifying what respect means to each other might be different for you guys than it is for us. So sitting down and asking yourself, asking your partner, what does respect and honor mean to you? How can I respect and honor you? And then also on the security side for the women, how can I provide you the most security? Not just security financially and in our home, but how do I provide you with emotional security, right? And so these are things that we had to learn. We had a rocky, rough start, y'all. We always say that. We had a rocky, rough start, and we're grateful to God for providing us healthy community around us that we could look to and say, okay, this is what respect and honor looks like when you don't come from an environment that showed you what respect and honor looked like, right? That was very key for us. And so we also do something where we'll ask each other the question, where's your respect and honor score?
Yeah.
You know,
Security score?
Where's your security score?
Yeah.
How am I doing in that area? Do I need to improve, right? And so that gives each other some time to get feedback from one another.
Absolutely. And over time, this is something that you have to really cultivate and you have to practice. And so that's the main thing about it, right? I don't want us to be afraid to actually put these things into action. So when we start actually practicing these things, give yourself grace, right? Give yourself grace to actually make the mistakes. Give yourself grace to actually, trip over this, or not realize, oh, I didn't do this, because truth be told, a lot of habits die hard. And so we want to allow ourselves to give those opportunities and give ourselves that space and room to be able to understand, hey, this is somewhere that we're going to possibly make some mistakes. Allow ourselves to be able to make that, to be able to circle back around if we need to and actually try again, right? And so give yourself grace in that way and everything. Allow yourself to be able to make those mistakes. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and lastly, when it comes to respect, is really identifying and acknowledging each other's differences.
Yep.
One thing is for sure, me and my husband are different in a lot of ways,
Right.
but we're the same in a lot of ways too. I had to learn to see his differences as gifts. I had to see them as he's a part of my team and these are his gifts, instead of seeing them like, why don't you think like I think? Well, he's not me, right? And so that wasn't fair for me to have that expectation of him to think like I think, to behave like I think. I had to identify what makes him him, acknowledge it, and then appreciate it. That is at the highest level of respect, when you learn to acknowledge each other's differences and then appreciate them instead of trying to change them to be more like how you are.
Yeah. One of the things I like to say is that I like to celebrate each other's differences in that way, right? The celebration of it is a way of us actually acknowledging the fact that, what's different about my spouse is not a bad thing. What's different about my spouse is actually something that I just need to understand and learn about and actually grow in, right? Because, one of the imageries that I always like to, kind of create is that a lot of times our marriage, can be two people coming from two totally different backgrounds, a different childhood upbringing, a different, hardships throughout life and things of that nature. And we're coming up with two different lifestyles and everything. We have to make that blend together and understand how those differences can really fit together and make sense to you. So that's why I feel like a lot of times all marriages are not created equal in that way. And so we have to we have to do the work and being intentional in those areas to actually make sure that we're putting in the work for our marriage the way that we need it.
Yep, and we have a call to action for you guys. So I know we've been talking a lot, but what we're going to do is want you guys to pause the video, and we have a call to action. We want you guys to stop and actually engage each other with this question. What are my gifts, my talents, and my differences that I'm bringing into this relationship that can contribute to the success of our marriage? So I'll say that again. What are my gifts, my talents, and my differences that I am bringing into this relationship that contribute to the success of this marriage? We want you guys to acknowledge each other's differences, appreciate them, and see how you guys can implement them more into the success of your relationship. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great, guys. Thank you guys for doing that call to action. I think that was a really great exercise. I think that'll really help you guys in the future. Now we're going to be moving on to effective communication strategies, okay? So, did you guys know specifically for effective communication, that has been one of the biggest areas and really one of the biggest challenges within marriages that has actually been one of the main causes of divorce, which is often, for the most part, tied to unresolved conflicts and also as well lack of intimacy and as well as unrealistic expectations. I think that's something that actually is really key, because unrealistic expectations specifically are areas in which that is really in our control. And if we don't actually take advantage of those opportunities with our spouse to communicate what those expectations really are, then truth be told, we're actually tying our hands behind our backs. And I really want us to make sure that we actually are allowing our spouses and ourselves to communicate and speak our voices when we need to be spoken. And so it's really important to have those things actually put in place specifically so that the communication can be clear.
Yeah, again, communication was a big area that we even had to learn because we communicate differently. I'm more of a external processor. My husband's more of an internal processor. There are times when I need to internally process too, and he becomes an external processor.
Yeah.
We evolved over time.
Absolutely.
But here's the key thing: self-awareness will be your friend.
Yes.
Self-awareness will be your friend. Knowing what you bring into the relationship in terms of communication, knowing how you communicate, how you're showing up in the relationship.
Yep.
Like you might yell or talk or get loud and you don't even realize it, and then you realize, oh, maybe I'm talking loudly and this is why my spouse is responding. Well, that's something to be self-aware about. Maybe you are triggered by certain things or certain sounds or certain words that your partner says that completely puts you on a defensiveness.
Yeah.
Stephen Covey in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People said that seek first to understand, then be understood. That's his 5th habit of highly effective people.
Absolutely.
So when you're communicating with your spouse, particularly when it's like an issue, you want to really understand first, what is their perspective? What is their experience of the situation or the circumstance before you defend your position? That is going to help you, number one, respond correctly, that you're correctly responding to the right thing. And number two, you're also going to have an opportunity to put yourself in their shoes. How do they feel? What is their experience of you, of the situation that you might not have seen because you didn't really understand it fully?
And I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a cheat code here, right? And we just kind of touched on it a little bit there as well with my wife, as far as seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Specifically, if you're actually having issues communicating through conflict, what we need to start doing is making sure that we're taking turns being understood and taking turns understanding. So for example, if I'm actually trying to communicate, what issues I have going on or things of that nature that I'm having struggles with and problems with, the things that, it may be a problem with her or maybe a problem with anything else that may be externally as far as that's concerned. I'm the one that's actually seeking to be understood in that moment. So at that point in time, it's her turn to be understanding. But when the time comes for me to actually be to be the one that actually needs to be understanding, I need to know when to cut that off and actually say, okay, now it's time for me to open my ears and to actually now be in the position of understanding and then be receiving of that. Because the idea is that we actually need to see ourselves as conduits, very similar to a plug, right? If we actually have the female end or to the male end, we need to make sure that we're able to receive. If we're in the posture of receiving, that's important for us, how we can be able to listen and rather not be trying to be understood at the same time and understood, trying to go back and forth. That's how conflict goes on. That's how defensiveness starts. That's how breakdowns in communication take place. And so let's try to be just trying to be specifically mindful of those things, because that's where the awareness comes into play.
Yeah.
Or are we trying to be understood while the other person is trying to be understood at the same time? It's going to create a blockade there for us.
Absolutely. And if you find that you're caught up in the cycle of conflict, a cycle of arguing, what we realize is sometimes your attachment style is being triggered. That is a concept that we would discuss in counseling. There's 4 different attachment styles, and we don't have time to go through it now. But if your attachment style is being triggered, then you're constantly going to be in this cycle of defensiveness. Also, what happens is when you get into your emotional brain and get defensive, your amygdala and limbic systems get activated. Your cortisol levels rise, and you are unable to see your spouse for the person that they are. They actually say you start to see them differently.
Yeah.
And so that means you need to bring your cortisol levels down, bring your defenses down, and deactivate the emotional brain. Okay, and there's one way you can do that. We think you need to take a break. We think you need to pause. So if in the conversation you guys are just getting at it and the intensity is going up, we call that intense fellowship. You just continue it gets more and more and more passionate.
Yeah.
Pause. Take a break. You guys, for 5 minutes, go to separate rooms, and then you want to do a deep breathing activity. You want to do 2 quick deep breaths in and an 8 count out. 2 quick deep breaths in and an 8 count out. Dr. Andrew Huberman out of Stanford recommends this. He's a neurobiologist, and what he says is that when you do this, this is the quickest way to reduce the amount of cortisol in your body. Your abdomen pushes down and the space around your heart expands, and the cortisol levels decrease. When your cortisol levels decrease, now your defenses are down and you're able to be vulnerable, really getting to those underlying feelings and thoughts and not necessarily the protective response that happens in those intense environments.
Absolutely. So what we want to do now is we want to actually set up a call to action now. So now this is your all saying an opportunity, right? We want you guys first and foremost to actually think about this. What can I now do to improve my communication in this marriage? However young you may be or however older you may be in your marriage, what can I do to now improve my communication with the tools that we've given you to this point? How can you guys sit down and talk about what can we now try to implement into our marriage and into our communication style to where it can be much more effective in that situation? All right. Want to give you guys a chance to do that. We'll be right back.
Okay, so now that you got that done, we're going to move on to the next section. This next section is section 3, and it's keeping your spark alive. This is probably my favorite section, y'all, truly, because there's been so many things that I've learned in my own relationship about keeping the spark alive. Now, when we think about the work of marriage, this is one that you really have to put a lot of effort and intention behind it, because marriage is so important to keep the romance, the intimacy, the passion alive, but it's not always easy, right? In the initial stages of relationships, it's just easy. Like, you don't really have to do much. It's just there. But after kids get involved, after work gets involved, maybe you travel a lot, maybe you have family that's just needing your help and pulling on you all the time. That just gets in the way. And before you know it, you're like, wait, we haven't had a date night. We haven't, held hands in a long time. So keeping this spark alive is something that I'm really passionate about as well. I want to talk about how you guys need to communicate through it, right? One of the ways to keep the spark alive is to make sure you're being really intentional. So one of them is date nights, right? We highly encourage you guys, do not put date night on the back burner. Families do this all the time. They put date night on the back burner. Oh, we don't have time. Oh, I'm too tired. I remember days where we decided to push through our tiredness and went on date night. And I was like, wow, I'm really glad we did that. I'm really glad we went to that restaurant. And all we did was go to a restaurant and talk. And that helped our relationship so much. But what I wanted to do was throw on some slippers, climb into bed, and go to sleep because the day was long. I had small children at the time. And that brings in another point. Different stages of life will present different reasons and opportunities to pull you away from your partner. What we have to do is to be that force towards each other, pursuing each other at all times. So if kids are involved, you got to talk about it. Because let me tell you, kids are going to pull at your passion. They're going to pull at the intimacy. When you first have that baby, you're going to be very sleepless. Like some people go through, I heard this new thing they got out where you can get the postpartum overnight doulas. I didn't have that. I had to wake up with my baby. And anyway, my sleep patterns got disturbed. And even today, to this day, sometimes my sleep patterns get disturbed. But it's not because of my baby. It's because of health reasons, and it's because of work. And, so all of this pulls at, even having the capacity for your partner, right? And so romance is something that you have to work at. Think of different ways. How can I love on him? How can I appreciate him? How can I show him that I'm here and I'm pursuing him? And it be different. Like I'm just gonna get creative with this because again, this is the work of marriage.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we actually, I think, stressed early on in other initiatives that we actually have through our marriage history and marriage ministry actually was break the pattern. And one of the biggest things I would probably say in this situation is break the pattern or break the routine in this situation. We easily can get caught up in a routine that actually allows us to be able to really kind of get sucked in. Right? We start thinking about, again, like my wife said, kids, work, health issues and things of that nature, right? And after the day has been long and everything, we think about taking care of ourselves. So pretty much at that time, we just want to go take a nap, right? And that becomes eventually over time our routine. And when we don't break that routine and realize, wow, we've actually put our relationship and our marriage on the back burner. And now it's actually something that we're trying to fight to actually get back into the habit of now. And we don't realize, like when we go out on a date night, it's like, wow, We almost get kind of lulled to sleep in our own form of our routine, thinking that we were doing something and thinking that we were connecting. When truth be told, we go on a date night and it's like, whoa, this is like foreign now to us. It's like, what? And now it's something that we realize, wow, this is something that's great that we added to our opportunity to be able to do. And so focusing on where those areas are that are really important in your marriage, I think is really key, specifically with date night, but also as well, romance, the pursuit of your spouse. That right there is a big one, right? Because a lot of times we can be pursuing really just trying to keep functional, right? Trying to pursue, trying to make sure that the kids are on bed on time, right? Or getting them to school the next morning, right? Or all these different obligations that we have at work or bills or things like that or whatever. It's so easy to put those things out in forefront, but we want to make sure that we actually have now an intentional perspective of saying, no, I'm going to break that pattern and I'm going to reestablish a pattern of focus of investing into my marriage, into my relationship, and into my spouse to where they can see that I have intentional pursuit towards them for that.
Yeah, and two ways you can do that. First, we tell all our couples that we counsel, make sure you guys have couch time.
Yeah.
Couch time is at least 20 minutes up to an hour where you sit down with each other every day, you check in. We say start with gratitude and then move into is there anything on your heart?
Yeah.
And use this time to really like engage each other, like let's talk. If you have a problem with like coming up with questions or engaging your partner because you feel like you know them and that they haven't evolved over time, which that happens.
Yep.
But you don't know your spouse because they are evolving. They are changing right before your eyes.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we say you can do is get these cards, like conversation cards. They have them on Amazon, or you can download the app. There's an app called Card Deck that has all different types of levels where you can start off like high level questions that you do during date or really deep questions that you do in marriage.
Yeah.
Like either one you can do, and it can engage each other during couch time and really show each other, hey, I'm pursuing you. I want to know more. I'm still engaged into this marriage and I'm ready to grow and continue to connect and be in love and build that romance with each other. It is not easy. Definitely if you have like hormonal changes, you don't realize that your hormonal changes are happening. Men and women age differently. So like, your sexual rhythms are going to change, right? As you age, as you have children, your sexual rhythms are going to change with your body as your body changes, as you move into menopause, women, or after you have children. All these changes are going to happen. It's going to affect how you guys receive each other, how you engage with each other. But the key thing is you have to communicate through it. We keep on saying that. You have to communicate through it. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm feeling. But it's not us. I think there's something else here. And let's go to the doctor, find out, is there something physical going on? Okay, there's nothing physical. Okay, is there something mental and emotional? Maybe we need to sit down with a therapist and see if that's something happening there. And then, just sit down with each other and say, where are you? How are you doing? And really like continue to move forward with that.
Absolutely. And that communication, I think, really opens the door for vulnerability in that area, even for us guys, right? We have to make sure to be able to be watchful of our diet and things of that nature, right? So if we're getting ourselves a little out of shape, that can actually affect our libido on different occasions, right? You want to be cognizant of all these things that actually can affect you a lot of times, right? The things that we consume, the things that we take, and obviously those particular patterns a lot of times affect how we actually engage with our wife, right? And then that way, a lot of times, it makes things a little less taboo. And I think that's the thing, right? Us communicating about our vulnerabilities, our frailties, our, downfalls and things of that nature a lot of times. Don't allow that to be something that actually goes against your relationship, but allow it to be something that's for your relationship. It's a way in which to be able to be more open with your spouse, but also as well, you guys can partner together with those areas that you may have challenges in, right? And you'll be so surprised as to how you guys can work together and actually resolve those issues. So let's not try to cut ourselves off in those areas. Let's try to use those as areas and opportunities to be able to build ourselves together. So what we want to do now is to actually have another call to action at this moment, okay?
Okay.
This call to action is going to be based around us really establishing the spark. What are some ideas that you would actually say would be great for you? Because again, like we said before, all relationships are not created equal. So what are some ideas for how you can keep the spark alive in your marriage? We definitely want you to be able to implement some of the things that we've suggested here as far as couch time and being able to obviously do date nights, of course, but all of that looks different. And for how you guys have those conversations, we've given you guys those tools in that area. So I really want you guys to stop and think about that. Have a moment to pause, think about that. We'll be right back, all right?
Okay, so the next section that we're moving on to is handling conflicts constructively. The truth is, you will have conflict.
Yes, you will.
Conflict is not a bad thing. A lot of people think that, oh, we can't argue. There's something wrong with our relationship if we're arguing or if we have conflict. You're two different human beings with two different perspectives and two different desires most of the time. It's okay to have conflict. Dr. John and Julie Gottman, who are the leading clinical psychologists on couples and relationships, they did a love lab. And over this love lab, they had these couples come into an apartment, over 600 couples. They studied their heart rate, they had video on them, and they had them stay inside this apartment called the love lab for 2 weeks. And what they were actually looking for is to see which couples were headed for divorce versus the couples that were headed for success, marriage success. What they found is that almost all the couples argued. It wasn't that they argued that showed them divorce or not. What it was how they argued. So a couple that would argue and they would really eat at the core of a person's character, those couples ended up divorcing over a period of time. But it was the couples that complained but didn't go to the depths of the person's character, they had marital success. So this is an example. Let's just say you're complaining about the dishes in the dishwasher. It's okay to have conflict about the dishes and you want your partner to help you with the dishes in the dishwasher. They're always there. You could say something like, man, I wish you would do the dishes in the dishwasher. It really would help me. We have people coming over. That's a conflict. That's maybe you guys got into it about that. That's okay. But when you start to say something like, you're lazy, you're just like your dad, you know, really getting at the core of their character, making them like twisting it and hit those low blows, that's when you are degrading and really disintegrating the very core of your marriage. It's how you argue. That's what we want to make sure that we highlight in this part of the section.
Absolutely. And the way in which we a lot of times need to make sure that we constructively handle conflict specifically is going to be based around 3 areas that we really want to be able to focus in on. And that's going to be specifically for humility, sacrifice, and compromise. And so that right there, I think, are one of the main 3 diffusers that we need to keep in mind that helps us to be able to guide through the area of conflict, disagreements, and any type of arguments specifically. When we're actually allowing ourselves to be able to focus in on humility first and foremost, right? I think the biggest thing and the biggest challenge that a lot of times we run into is that there's a lot of pride involved in the middle of conversations, right? If we're actually having any kind of, argument or something like that or whatever, and it's subjective in some kind of way for the most part, and it's your word against mine and things of that nature, then it's just a simple bicker back and forth and everything based on opinion. Those are areas that I believe that if we just have a little bit of humility in that moment in time, we can say, okay, you're right. And we can do this one thing. We can disagree agreeably. That's a huge key, right? When we can disagree agreeably, then that allows us to be able to say, I have capacity in the room to allow someone else essentially to have the ball. Right? And essentially to be able to agree with what they have because it's not that big of a deal, or if it's, not something that actually is a big, thing that's going to shift the world for the most part for us, right? But it's just simply a matter of just saying, hey, let's go to this restaurant today, or let's go down this road, or however the case may be, but let's try to make sure that we're not majoring on minors in that situation. The second area that we want to make sure that we're focusing, of course, on is going to be sacrifice. This area here can be a little bit more difficult than others, but the idea is that it can be done. When we're actually trying to sacrifice, we're simply just saying, hey, we want to sacrifice from the mindset of how can I serve my spouse? That's a really huge thing that I think that really blessed us and really helped us in our marriage and our relationship, is that understanding how can I serve my spouse and be thinking about them. The word consideration comes to mind, right? If I'm considering them, right, being thoughtful and thinking about what they may need as far as that's concerned, right? That's a way in which we can naturally be able to gauge sacrifice, right? Again, a lot of these things early on in marriage or early on in even our dating season, a lot of times they came natural for the most part for us. And it was super easy. But now when, kids are involved, bills are going on, right? All these different other obligations in life are going on, everything seems to be bigger, right, on some level. But at the same time, it's still the same concept of how we need to be able to allow ourselves to sacrifice, all right? The third one that we really want to focus on also as well that helps us to facilitate all of this is compromise. If we're trying to work out some kind of an understanding and it's like, all right, this situation is a big, important decision that we need to make. Let's try to make sure that we do it together. It's really important that we focus in on how can I meet you halfway. right? If we're trying to meet the other person halfway, that compromise needs to happen to where we can both say our opinions and also as well our heart and what things are important to us are actually incorporated within that decision. Again, consideration is in place, right? That thoughtfulness for the other person is in place. Those are really, really important things. Again, keep those things in mind: humility, sacrifice, and compromise. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, and I love that. That's something that has been at the foundation of even our relationship from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to mention about humility, sacrifice, and compromise is just to make sure that you're hyper aware, self-awareness. Remember, we talked about that earlier, of any mental barriers that you feel when you go to do that. So when you go to be humble and you're like, fighting against it, or you feel yourself fighting against sacrificing or compromising, like that's something to take note of and really to maybe even go seek out counseling for, to see, why do I have a problem compromising? Why do I have a problem sacrificing? Why do I seem to only want my way? So really some things to think about as you move forward.
Absolutely. And so on this one is going to be really key here, right? This is going to be our call to action for this specific area here, specifically as far as how to handle conflict. All right. And so what I want you guys to focus on is this, right? Specifically, how can we fight right? Right? How can we show humility, sacrifice, and compromise in our differences to resolve conflict? I think you'll find it interesting to be able to use this specific tool here in order to be able to resolve any type of differences, breakdowns in communication, and any areas where we may miss each other in certain areas in communication, right? Try to stop for a moment, pause the video, and be able to gauge certain areas where this can be the most effective in your relationship. We'll be right back.
Okay, so now that you've done that, we're on our last section, guys. You've done so much work today, and you should be so proud of yourself. So we're going to move to the last section, growing together over time. Whether you're newlywed or you've been married for some time, the truth is you are going to evolve as a person. You're going to change. We've mentioned that quite a few times, even in our sessions today, that you know, growth and growing together is going to be different for every couple. It's going to look different for every couple. But a couple key things that we want to mention about evolving and growing together is your health. Your health is going to change and grow as women. You know, you might start off completely healthy. You have everything works and looks great, and then over time you like, wait, I got to put a lot of effort into this. I really have to think about my health, my hormones, my emotions. Your health and your hormones affects your mental state. How is that affecting your marriage? How you approach your marriage, how you approach your spouse. Maybe you're saying no to any engagement, physical engagement with your partner because you're physically tired. Your physical health is at play. So that's going to evolve. Then your mental health. Again, like we said, your physical health affects your mental health. So something to keep an eye out for, to make sure that you're always going to those doctor's appointments, keeping on top of that so that it doesn't, you know, you think that it's your partner and you're pointing the finger. There was a season of our marriage where I was pointing the finger when it had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the physical ailments that I was dealing with in my body. And once I realized that, I was like, oh man, he can walk through the door and do nothing wrong, but that's not because he was doing something wrong. That had everything to do with my perception of it based on my own mental and physical needs. And then life, you know, life evolves. So life happens to you. Job loss happens, grief, people die, you know, and that affects you. Things go wrong, disappointment. Disappointment is a huge one. Sometimes people are just disappointed with life, and that affects their relationship, and they end up taking it out on each other. You're the reason why I didn't become a millionaire. No, maybe it was because something else happened, and that wasn't because the reason. Like, not turning to your spouse and attacking them, but learning that life is happening around us. We're evolving, we're changing, we're figuring this out as we go, but we're on the same team. We have different gifts, but we're on the same team. So those are just a few things that I want to highlight about growing together over time. And again, this is going to be something that you might have to get help for if you find yourself stuck. You know, couples, we talk to couples all the time, they're just stuck. But it's not because there's something wrong with them or their relationship. It's just they have to get back on track. And that's what we help them do.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that you kind of mentioned there definitely was being on the same team. being on the same team, I think, is a really huge thing, especially when you're going through life struggles, right? Again, like as we talked about before, if we're going through grief or we're going through loss or natural things that how kind of, as they say, life be lifing, right? And so when that actually happens, a lot of times we have to realize that, okay, now we have another spouse that's along with us, and they're actually going to experience how we deal with life stressors, right? Yeah. So if there's loss or if there's something that happens that is out of our control, job loss or something of that nature and everything, that struggle, what that looks like, we're super vulnerable during times like that. Yeah. And a lot of times people aren't comfortable with showing how they can be vulnerable dealing with a loss or being down at a certain time, right? Or being, kind of caught off guard or being hurt or injured possibly by, God forbid, or any time that something happens throughout life for the most part, how we deal with that struggle, it matters also as well how we deal with it with our spouse, right? Do we isolate? Do we pull ourselves away in certain situations, right? Growing with someone and knowing how to be able to exercise empathy during that time, I think is going to be very important as well too, right? Because again, as we mentioned before earlier, expectations a lot of times, disappointment, all these different things that come about and everything, right? When we say and we set out plans throughout our relationship saying, I have these visions for, what I want us to do at this point in time throughout throughout a year, like that, at year 5, we would be here, or year 10, we'd be here, and things of that nature. All these disappointments that could possibly come into play and everything, and realize that, those things actually can still happen. But the problem is that if we're dealing with real life situations in real time, it's really important that we pace ourselves and give ourselves realistic expectations for what situations have actually happened. Because again, we don't know a lot of times that we can't plan certain things that life can actually bring about to us. And so we have to adjust and adapt as life goes on. And I think with us functioning in that way, realizing that we're doing this not just by ourselves, but with a partner along with us, it's super important for us to keep them in mind while we're going through that struggle. And that could be a difficult muscle to exercise, right? That's one of the main things that I always say, even in counseling, which what's really important in counseling specifically is that it's a mental gym. And so we're actually going to be naturally exercising some muscles we've never exercised before. And that's going to be one that typically a lot of times for new couples especially is something new and fresh to kind of figure out how to deal with struggle together with someone else. Like you've lost a job by yourself before. And what that looks like when you go back home, it's going to be very different now. And now someone else has to see that. So what does that look like, and what do they expect, and how can you hold their hand and kind of walk them through that process, but also as well, how can the other person show empathy and kind of be there with them, give them the space that they need, but also as well kind of learn their process and their pattern of how they actually grieve through that situation and understand that. So I think it's going to be really important for us to keep these things in mind, because it's all imperative as far as how we grow together and how we evolve together. Next thing and last thing I want to cover specifically for the men is really going to be how we take care of our bodies, guys. Get in the gym. I'm just going to say that there. Get in the gym. I think that's going to be the specific thing, because I'm even talking to myself in that way as well too. The actual growth process behind that, I think, is really going to go towards our confidence in that way, right? And it's also as well, when we feel good and we look good, we feel good about ourselves, right? And that builds confidence. And it also as well helps our libido and our growth in that process. And I think it's going to go a long way in the general idea of how we not just see ourselves, but see other people around us. And so it helps build across the board in that way and everything. So let's make sure that we're focusing in those areas. Again, self-awareness, being able to cover those areas, I think is huge for us both to be able to have that way, have that understanding in the way in which we actually grow over time.
We're going to get to our calls to action, but right before I do, I want to mention that everything that we're saying, all 5 steps that we just mentioned, is absolutely under the covering of God. Because without the Lord as the third pillar, we wouldn't have made it. It is Him that gave us the wisdom to put these things into place.
Correct.
So we cannot end this session, in this workshop, without saying God has to be involved. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have every single reason to walk away. But God, right? But God, He said this was my partner. He brought this person into my life, and I believe Him. And then as you walk through that storm, you're going to see the beauty on the other side of it when you get through it.
That's right.
Not when you stop in the middle of it, not when you give up in the middle of it, not when you decide to clock out in the middle of it, but when you walk through it hand in hand together. Right. Now you're going to be stronger on the other side of it, because God brought you through. He was that third cord that kept you together. So here's the call to action. How have I evolved since we first met? This is what you want to ask each other. How have I evolved since we first met? What is something that has changed about me that I haven't shared with you? And then lastly, what things can we build upon in order to grow together as we both evolve through each age and stage of our lives?
Yeah. All right, guys, we made it. We did it, guys. Thank you guys again so much for joining us for this first marriage maintenance workshop. We really hope it blessed you. We really hope it helped you. Make sure to use those tools. Even if you need to rewind these sections and go back over these again, please do that. I think these areas and all of these concepts that we talked about today are going to be incredibly effective for your marriage and for the maintenance of your marriage. If you need to do it multiple times throughout the year, make sure you do that. But also as well, we definitely highly recommend different resources that we mentioned throughout our workshop as well, but also as well attending seminars, attending marriage conferences and things of that nature. Super helpful and super great and edifying actually for your marriage. Also as well, even connecting with different small groups, even if your local church actually offers those as well too. Incredibly important to be able to build on those things so that you can be able to edify and build your marriage throughout the entire time, whether you're a young couple or whether you're an older couple as well.
So as you end, you can also go to relationalityco.com, which is our website, where we will be doing other workshops for bringing first-time parents, bringing the baby home. We're going to be doing a workshop on vision casting for the next year. We'll be doing workshops on rekindling the spark, going deeper. We haven't talked about finances and balance yet, so we'll be talking about that in future workshops as well. All of that can be found on our website at Relationality Co, as well as signing up for counseling session if you find that you need it. Again, thank you for joining us. We will see you soon.
All right.